Redditors who have gone to war with a neighbor. What's your story? Story 1 had a shitty neighbor that lived downstairs. Did all sorts of loud late into the night. Usually music and friends. One day, I had enough, and after about 10 minutes of very loud music, I just started stomping on the floor. He came bursting out of his apartment and pounding on my door. I answered, acting very confused. You need to stop stomping around. I'm trying to work. I wasn't stomping. Yes, you were. I was dancing to your shitty music. Turn it down, and ITLL never happen again. It never happened again. Story 2, my parents' neighbor constantly blows his leaves onto my parents' property. My dad tried to confront him a few times, and the guy literally ran away every time. Yes, a grown man dropped his leaf blower and ran inside and locked the door and pretended not to be home when he saw my dad coming. On multiple occasions, my father is not a scary man. My dad was finally able to confront him one day. He was super polite and said the guy could blow the leaves into their woods, but just not onto their clean lawn. The guy responded, your property doesn't start until 10 feet from the road, so you can't do anything about it. If you want me to stop, sue me. This is technically correct, as the property is off a private road owned by a convent. And per state law, the owner of the road also owns the 10 feet of land on either side of the road. So my dad called up the convent and asked if a neighbor is allowed to dump his leaves on their property. Turns out they don't like that. So now, instead of being in a neighborly argument with my parents, he's trying to fight a bunch of nuns in court. Not a good look. Story 3, live in a dorm with shared kitchen and toilet. One neighbor refused to buy toilet paper and always stole food. During his summer break, only him and me were living at the dorm, and he continued the practice. So I made some stew and put a lot of laxatives in it. I also left only one roll of toilet paper in the bathroom that was covered in itching power. He was pissed, but I laugh whenever he tries to scold me for it. Story 4 years ago, my upstairs neighbors were wanted felons living in an apartment leased by the lady's brother. They sold drugs out of there. They all times of the day, loud music 8 a.m. to 12 a.m., locked their daughter outside for hours at a time. So we would do things with her and give her snacks, but you could tell her social and educational development was way behind. After finding their pictures online on the MN50, Most Wanted, I called the police, and they didn't believe me. They called me a child who was 22, all while the neighbors' behavior got worse as more people reported them. It took them 4 months and dozens of phone calls to finally get the police to arrest fugitives they were supposedly looking for. Story 5, it's more of a Cold War situation when my boyfriend cuts the grass. Even if our neighbor just cut his grass a few days prior. Here, our neighbor will cut his again the next day. He's an old man who can't stand to have his lawn just a smidge taller than ours. Story 6, on a week-long cruise. First 2 mornings, our neighbors on both sides were ridiculously loud, basically screaming in Spanish and constantly waking us up. We didn't go to bed until 3 to 4 a.m., so they cut into your sleep. On third night, at around 10 to 11 p.m., we go to our room. Blasted the TV side note T versus on cruises should be programmed to not go as loud as we made it and left it like that until 3 to 4 a.m. You could hear outside our door. It was very loud like they were. Next morning, what do you know, the neighbors realized other people can hear them and were quiet the rest of the cruise. Story 7, when I was in elementary school, our neighbor's 4 dogs would always in our backyard. My mom asked the neighbor many times to pick it up, but he never did. So every morning before school, my mom would send me and my brother on patrol. At first, we just put the in the neighbor's yard, but our neighbor never got the hint. My mom then had us put the on his porch, and then he got a fence. Story 8, well, it all started one day when they were having their fence put in, and one of the workers accidentally snapped one of our tomato plants at the base. So she decided to take it inside and cook all of the green tomatoes into this unbelievably yummy Indian food I can't even begin to pronounce or spell, and brought it over as an apology. Then we made fresh cut pasta and gave them some to give the container back because we, of course, didn't want to keep it. Then they had the audacity to make us some Indian desert thing that tasted like heaven. By then, our garden had started to produce. So we gave them 2 bags of produce that would have gone to waste, and they gave you some eggplant dish. So we brought over a tray of cookies, and now it's 3 years later, and we are in a heated war over who can outfood the other. We're fighting a losing battle, though, because they're vegetarian and we're not, so we have to modify most of what we make for them. But we have a huge vegetable garden, so we have the leg up on that. Story 9, my neighbor leaves trash in their yard. We have a HOA that is basically as feckless as possible. And this isn't some shitty neighborhood. We're talking 300K in Columbus, Ohio, which is about as upper middle class as you can get in the Midwest. They don't tie up their garbage bags, so some random falls out and blows into my yard. I took the 6 pieces I could find and duct taped them to their garage because I wanted them to be aware of the issue. For all of winter, they threw their plastic water bottles into a pile next to their garage, and it kept getting bigger and bigger until the snow melted, and it was way too obvious, so they finally trashed it. And If all this is too specific and my neighbor happens to read this, then clean up your trash, you Vernon Dudley looking. Story 10. I lived next door to a cocaine club for years. They'd start up around 11 p.m. or midnight and go till dawn. The cops Brooklyn were clearly on the take, as they'd repeatedly tell me during the day that the place had been closed down, and yet they were showing up 3 or 4 times a week there to deal with fights. I asked one of them about why they couldn't close the place at 4 a.m. one day after a particularly noisy fight, and they wouldn't even look me in the eye. We had a huge number of beer bottles because I also used the place as a performance rehearsal space. So at a certain point I'd start throwing bottles out my window to smash at their back door when they were noisy. They really hated that. But as I pointed out, what were they going to do? Call the cops? So they eventually managed to keep the noise down. It kind of worked out. Eventually they were gentrified out of existence. Apu. Well, if the police won't help us, I guess, we'll just have to take the law into our own hands. Chief Wiggum, yeah. Yeah, a lot of people are doing that these days. Story 11. Back in like 2009 to 2010, I was at war with my downstairs neighbor. She would hit her ceiling with a broomstick, and I would point my bass speaker down toward the floor. I got pregnant with twins that were high risk and got a temporary handicap placard for parking closer. She borrowed one and took my spot. Few months go by of straight war. Then I had my twins. They'll be damned if we didn't stop with each other. And that woman was the only person to help me. We became best friends and still are to this day. We still laugh at our silly war. Thank you, Heather. Story 12. Background. I use my bicycle to ride to the train station pretty much every day, having to go over the sidewalk for a grand amount of 10 meters before entering the street. Edit. Since many people think I go fast over the sidewalk, I go as fast as a normal person walks on my bicycle, not being unreasonably fast. If I were to put one foot on the sidewalk, I'd stand still instantly. One day, he comes at me and accuses me of almost hitting him with my bicycle. Now, I have no idea what he talked about since I've never been anywhere close to him, but he insists on it. Fast forward a few weeks, he complains again that everybody keeps riding their bicycle on the sidewalk, and he's scared of his life that people will hit him because he's deaf on one ear. He also doesn't look where he goes, instead trusts his other ear, but that's outside the story. After that, I talked with him so that he would stop complaining, saying I would go very slow, and in front of his house I would watch out for him. Fast forward 2 months, and suddenly a mediator shows up that my neighbor wants to talk, but doesn't want to do it alone. They keep adding up here since we talked about it before. I said that if he wants to talk, he can just knock on the door and we will talk. Never had a problem with him before, so no idea why he would now. Nothing came from that. Fast forward another 2 months, and suddenly police shows up at the door. Neighbor has filed a complaint to not only me, but also my other neighbor who, by the way, does not even know how to ride a bicycle, about riding on the sidewalk and nearly hitting him, explained the story to the police, and they were nice and helpful and understood my point. They advised to be careful around his house, which I already was. Another month later, another mediator shows up. Want to talk with us together, and at this point I refuse it. He's had plenty of opportunities. This was 2 months ago. I wonder when his next complaint will be. Story 13. Currently at war with 2 young women who live across the street. I'm a pretty live and let live guy, so this took a lot. I ignored the overgrown lawn and piles of leaves they raked up and left there to molder. I didn't like the assorted that collected on their front lawn, but that wasn't enough to prod me into action. I didn't like the front step parties they'd have every weekend that kept me awake or forced me to close my windows and turn on the AC, but I didn't call the city. Not even then they'd wake me, yelling in the middle of the street at 4 a.m. What finally put me over the edge is one has 2 kids. The oldest is about 3 years old. She shouts obscenities at him daily. The first time it happened, I thought you shouldn't do that, but kids can drive, even the most reasonable person around the bend. Then I realized it was every day. I don't care about your stuffy. Move it, you little, screaming this at him. The poor little guy never says a word. It's like learned helplessness. I started to listen for it and realized she was constantly screaming at them and berating them inside the house too. Though I couldn't hear particulars, just constant screaming. You better believe I called Child and Family Services. I don't give a if those horrible cunts key my car at 4 a.m. If you treat a child like that, you don't deserve to have that child. I'm currently raining regulatory down on their heads through all the channels I can find. I will not stop until either of those kids are taken from her or she gets some anger management. Dog kept chewing through old fence. Kept coming up with excuses why he wouldn't pay his half to replace the fence. We shouldn't have had to pay any of it since it would have been structurally fine if his dog didn't keep chewing holes in it and escaping into our backyard. We decided to start leaving our side gate open. The dog would chew through and then go wandering through the neighborhood. After the 3rd pickup from the pound, he decided to buy scrap and patch up the holes. Story 14. Old neighbor from when I lived in town. Was the worst kind of neighbor, loud all times of the night. No garbage service, too much traffic in and out to not be dealing drugs, and 2 pit bulls that were either locked inside or on a chain. Subsequently, his dogs were not socialized and extremely aggressive. Both dogs would regularly get loose and attacked both my dog and myself. I had a 4-foot chain link fence around my whole yard for my dog, but his dogs would easily jump the fence, then attack my dog. After speaking with him several times, calling the police, animal control, etc., I told him I would defend my dog if he wasn't going to control his. Less than a month after that conversation, his dogs again jumped the fence and attacked my dog this time, causing severe damage to my dog emergency vet visit, and he nearly died. He learned I was good to my word that day. Edit, because I keep getting this question, I shot them. They're both dead. Not something I'm proud of. Story 15, I wrote about this in relationships, but basically one of my neighbors told me to keep my dog out of her side of her neighborhood, so she could walk around barefoot anywhere she wants. There are a lot of very stupid politics surrounding the whole thing, because she's a trustee for the condo association, and currently we are in a standoff. The dog has not noticed. Story 16 lived in a dorm with 5 other guys in college, and had to move out to the dorm across the quad building. It was a total of like 40-foot move. Below us were the soccer players. They were a rowdy bunch and often partied until 3 to 4 a.m. with loud music and drinking. Oftentimes we could feel the floor vibrate, and we called safety services on them to get them to quiet down. When we were moving, they decided to egg our door. We called safety services who claimed that didn't have cameras up on that particular set of dorms. So using this information, we egged them back and got safety service called on us. They said they knew we did it, they saw the footage, but if they punished us, they would also have to punish the soccer players. We also found out how to stop their music by trying to connect to their Bluetooth speaker. Story 17, we had some problems with our former neighbor. He would come over and yell at us over the most random things that were A, never actually wrong, and or B, not actually our fault. Once he came over on a Sunday morning ringing our doorbell, throwing a tantrum about some vines growing on the back fence. My husband went back there with him to check things out, and sure enough, they were growing up from a neighbor's side. Another time, my husband was out in our driveway washing out a couple of flower pots, and the dude came out of his house, started screaming at us about spraying dirty water into his yard. We weren't. He also called the fire department on us for smoking a brisket. Just lots of small weird incidents like that. This was a relatively normal guy in his 40s with a job, wife, 2 kids, and we live in a pretty nice suburban neighborhood. LOL, it wasn't like it was some crazy old crackpot. They sold the house, moved last year, thank goodness. And we found out later they divorced, apparently had some pretty big financial issues. I guess maybe it was the stress of what was going on in his life, just taking it out on us. Story 18, my newish neighbor was a maniac. Every night, I heard him screwing his boyfriend, and they were loud. I live in a house with a good amount of space between my home and his. Even with our windows closed, I could hear them screaming like feral cats. My husband finally had enough of it, so he went next door to tell them, politely, to take it down a notch. The next morning, he found a giant with a suction cup on the bottom stuck on the hood of his car with you carved into the side of the car. His brand new car. Cops were called. They denied it. We had it on camera. They were meth heads. Don't do meth, kids. This is so dumb. My neighbor got pissed that I hung up a feeder on my property, stating it attracted birds. I said, well, that's the point, to which he goes on a tirade about how he pays taxes and the birds don't, and that they were destroying his house, blah, blah, blah. This is all well and good until I just stopped responding to him, and he brings up my ex-girlfriend by saying, no wonder that moved out. It was an amicable breakup, so this was not an okay thing to say on many levels. I resisted the urge to punch him right then and there and calmly got into my car, drove to the nearest Lowe's, and bought a few more feeders to hang all around my property. I glared at him the whole time I was installing them. It's been 2 years, and he hasn't spoken to me since. I had never had a problem with him before that, and I rarely even converse with my neighbors because I normally keep to myself. Story 19, 2 neighbors. We will call them A and B, who hated each other. Neighbor really prided his lawn on being pristine and caused neighbor B no end of grief over things like leaves and lawn clippings ending up on his lawn, even if just because of wind. Police were called multiple times. This went on for a year. Neighbor B got fed up and intentionally planted clover in his lawn. He waited for it to flower and then set up an industrial fan to blow in a neighbor's lawn. I aspire to this man's level of pettiness every day. Story 20, I'm planning to get into one. Over parking issues, anybody got any tips? 1, not using their garages to park their cars. 2, parking outside, the marked lines diagonally. 3, letting outsiders' relatives park in the reserved parking areas meant for the other neighbors' cars. Story 21, a few years ago, my parents were having an issue with the neighbor's dog, shitting nearly exclusively in their lawn. My dad worked away from home a lot, and my mom is too timid to say anything and just picks it up. She would complain about it all the time, but never actually say anything to the neighbors. One day, I had enough of her complaining to me, so I went over to the neighbors to discuss the issue. Their response was that they just couldn't keep the dog in the yard. I suggested a tie-out cable, and they said they'd look into it. No tie-out cable was purchased, and the dog kept shitting in my parents' yard. So I went back over to let them know it was still happening. The response this time was that they would start picking it up right away. A couple weeks later, I go over to mow my parents' lawn, and guess what I step in? I grabbed a plastic bag and picked up 9 piles of, tied it off, and left it at the neighbor's front door, went about mowing the lawn, then went home. Mom calls me later that night and tells me the husband came over and bitched her out for the bag. Next week, I go back to mow the lawn, and there are 3 piles of 10 feet into my parents' property. I took a 9-iron and splattered them all over the side of the neighbor's house, grabbed a lawn chair and a beer, and waited in my parents' driveway until the neighbors came home with my shitty 9-iron. Husband sees it and storms over, cussing me out along the way. I told him that every time I find a pile in the yard, it's getting the same treatment. My parents don't own a dog. They shouldn't have to pick up dog. His wife is yelling at him in the background, telling him it's not worth it and to get in the house. He calls me a little and walks away. Never had another problem with, just dirty looks. Story 22, not me, but my grandpa really did go to war in Vietnam. He was a Marine, and his neighbor down the street parents' house at the time, as he was around 20, also got drafted with him. So he literally went to war with a neighbor. Story 23, when my parents' neighborhood was developed, our neighbor was friends with the developer and had his yard made a smaller size than ours because we share a drainage ditch in the middle, and they didn't want to pay property taxes on the unusable space. Now we have new neighbors, and they're constantly cutting our grass because they believe it's divided right down the middle. There's city tax records and property records that prove this, but they continue to do it. If I go to my parents to cut the grass, they will quick run out and do the perimeter of their yard before I get to it. I know it's petty and over 6 feet of grass, but it's the principle. Story 24, we called animal control on their dog. That's what escalated things, so basically our neighborhood's been around since the 20s, and while it's upscaled in my lifetime, it was severely blue-collar for most of its existence. There's about 8 old families still around. 4 of those families are tied together in a clannish knot of marriages that I would need to ask my mother for. One of their households was our neighbor, one of the other old families, but aside from the fact that my grandmother and their matriarch were good friends, that particular clan does not like us and never has. They had a German shepherd. He was unfixed, territorial, and allowed to run loose. He was a constant problem and would chase and bark after me and my sister. He jumped on me once and tried to bite my arm. He did bite my sister, did not manage to break skin, thank God. We had to get animal control involved multiple times. Finally, it had gotten to the level we had the right evidence, so that animal control could get the courts involved. And that's where things blew up. We started getting harassing phone calls late at night, which my parents were able to track to the payphone at the 7 to 11 that our neighbor's eldest daughter's boyfriend worked at. We got caller ID after that. Some more nuisance things I don't remember very well followed. The major thing I do remember, though, was after school was over for the year, going down to get the mail paper, and something shiny caught my eye in our gravel driveway. It was a roofing nail, and it was not the only one. Went up and told my mother, who called Dad at work, and let him know to check his tires. Thankfully, because of the gravel, all the nails had basically pointed themselves downwards and not gone into the tires. I grabbed a magnet and retrieved all the nails. It was an entire box's worth. My favorite part of this ordeal remains the fact that Dad had already planned to re-shingle the roof that summer, and we used every single one of those nails in the process. Other fun highlights of the long-term family drama. When I started 2nd grade, one of their cats had kittens. One of those kittens decided they liked me and basically moved himself into our house despite my father's best and repeated attempts to return him to our neighbor. This is your cat. Keep him indoors. They then told their youngest daughter we had stolen the cat and turned in all the other kittens to animal control. She held this against me for quite some time until she found out that her mother had actually had all the other kittens taken care of. The horrible German shepherd did end up mellowing a bit once he got old. He did once come pretty far into our property anyway, even after the drama, because they still didn't regularly keep him tied, even after being fined by the county, but was chased off with a vengeance by our tiny, elderly tabby cat who had no intention of putting up with that. Watching that nasty of a dog run off at full speed because he saw our old, partially toothless cat tear after him is still one of my favorite memories of her. The summer before my senior year, I got a job offer at the local dry cleaners. My father was a little concerned because the manager, M, and our neighbor were sisters, and while they didn't get along, he wasn't sure what I should expect. It ended up being a great job, and M was always happy to hire me back during my college breaks. My sister also ended up working there. M confided in me after about a year there that she had interviewed me pretty much entirely to offer sister, and she was pleased it had worked out well for the store in the long run. Story 25, lived in a college apartment complex during my sophomore year. Neighbors would always leave their trash bags outside their door, which was directly across from mine. This is the South, so trash in the summer heat smells terrible. They would leave it out there for days. I started by leaving a note, which they ignored, so I started setting up little fake horror scenes around their trash. For example, I will make a small tear in the trash bag, mix some ground beef with fake blood, and have it spilling out of the bag. I would then leave a trail of the fake blood from their door to the bag. Definitely got quite a few head-scratching looks. They eventually got the message. Story 26. This is kind of a one-sided war, but moved into a 2-bedroom unit building. Women below me was around 50, me 25, and my 5-year-old with autism. Landlord told her before we moved in since my son's room was above hers, she couldn't smoke in it anymore. I guess she threw a fit and threatened to move out. The landlord had lived in my apartment before me. So I move in, and I know she doesn't like me living there. So I try to be nice. After we get settled, I go down to introduce myself and kind of make the general offer, if you need anything, let me know. Without a moment's hesitation, she lists the following she claimed the landlord had done for her. And since I was in his old apartment, these responsibilities now fell on me. Take her trash out weekly, get her mail, and give it to her every day. Her dog was not housebroken, and she wanted me to clean up all the daily. Clean her cat's litter box daily. Now the cans were less than 15 feet from her door, and the mailbox was right outside. And this woman is perfectly healthy. Goes for jogs daily. I just kind of stood there for a minute, not sure what to say. After a few seconds, she says, well, landlord's name has been over out 2 weeks, and I need someone to pick up after the dog. I didn't say anything, I just walked away. About a week goes by. 3 a.m. I get knock on my door. It's this woman. She tells me my cat's walking too loudly, my 10-pound cat, and she needs to work in the morning. I told her ID, put in the bathroom. She tells me that's not enough. I just say I'll see what I could do and go back to bed. Few days goes by, and I notice the smell of cigs and weed. Now I smoke, but only outside. We both have fairly large decks surrounded by trees. I complain to the landlord, and he talks to her. She pretty much ignores him and says that me and my son are too loud. I get knock on my door once the landlord leaves, and it's her. She tells me that if she hears me and my son out of our beds between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., she's calling the cops. Now, I babysit most mornings starting at 6 a.m., and I asked what if I need to pee between those times. She told me to hold it. I rolled my eyes and told her it wasn't happening. Few days after that, I have a little girls and babysitting and my son out front playing outside. She comes over, can't do much about that the mailboxes are out front. She then walks over and whispers something to the little girl. I don't trust her, so I call the little girl over and tell her it's lunchtime. When we get inside, I asked her what the women told her, and the little girl swears she told her to push my son down the stairs. Now, the little girl's mom is super nice, but she can be so. I figured the best course of action was to tell her mom. After I told her mom, she said she'd be right back and started slamming on the women's door. Tells her that if she ever as much as talks to her daughter, she'll push her down the stairs. About a month has gone by since I move in. Me and my son were in an event downtown fireworks. I believe we got home around 912. My son went to the bathroom. Stripped off, I had his PJS in his room, and after he got his blanket, he was going to get into them and go to bed, and went downstairs. We had the top floor and a storage area and coat room downstairs to get his blanket for bed. I hear my son crying and yelling, and my son runs up the stairs, a poor little naked autistic 5-year-old who just had a full-grown woman yelling in his face. She keeps yelling about how we're being loud. I tell her to leave, or I'm calling the cops. Like this had come in without being let in and scare a 5-year-old. After this, my son ended up having bedwetting issues because he was afraid to get out of bed at night. Smaller things happened, like she'd take off for a week, leaving her cat outside. And when I called the SPCA, she claimed I stole her cat. Landlord told she would call about me having parties when I was home, complain about my cats, said that me cleaning at 5 p.m. was too loud and I should be settled by that time. Decided to move because I couldn't take it anymore. A few days before we moved everything out, she randomly brought me and my son cookies. Okay, weird. I figured she had done something to them, so I tossed them, along with her plate petty revenge. A few days after I move out, I get a message from a friend of hers saying she was bragging about giving us cookies shed put sleeping pills in. Cool, you crazy? Could have killed us if we ate too many. After I moved out, I made sure to tell everyone what a she was. Landlord had a hard time renting my apartment. Because of her, she didn't want anyone living above her, but also didn't want to pay the extra $200 a month that one cost for her to live there. Also, as a I paid someone to mash potato her lawn. If you don't know what the is, you take a box of instant mashed potatoes and the night before, or while it's raining, sprinkle it all over the lawn. They hydrate, turn to mashed potatoes, and get stuck under the grass, and it becomes impossible to clean up. They start to go bad and attract all kinds of bugs. Story 27, Aaron and Aaron Cute were kind of from the day we moved in across the street from them. We were excited to have our first house, excited to move in and meet our neighbors. They seemed okay at first, but it was all of their snarky comments about how they couldn't wait to move out of the neighborhood, how crappy this neighbor was, what a slob that one was, etc., parking on our street alternate sides nightly, in an effort to keep abandoned vehicles off of the street. We have an alley behind our house with a two-car garage, but no space to park a vehicle outside of the garage in the alley. We had 3 vehicles, so we have to park one on the street. They have a private driveway with a two-car garage, so they can park more cars off-street. To make things easier, I would just park my commuter car on the street. Since I was driving it every day, it was easy to just make sure I parked on the correct side of the street. That means that 3 nights out of the week, I would park in front of their house. One morning, I come out of my house to find a full-page note under the wiper, written by Aaron, ranting about my car being parked in front of their house, where their friends and their family should be able to park if they decide to come over. I ignore it, but I do set up a video camera pointed at my car, just in case they decide to escalate. Nothing happens for a week or so. Then one morning I come out to find my car saran wrapped bumper to bumper and top to bottom around the doors. My pocket knife is sharp. I wad it up and toss it on their lawn. When I come home, I park on my side of the street, go inside and watch the video of my car from the night before. It clearly shows 2 people come out of their house and wrap my car about 3:30 a.m. After dinner, there's a knock on the door. It's the police. They want to talk about a report that I threw a big ball of trash in a neighbor's yard. I don't deny it, but instead invite the officer inside to watch videos. One showing people coming out of Aaron and Aaron's house and wrapping my car, and the other of my cutting it off and giving it back to them. He thought that was priceless, told me not to worry about anything, and went back to talk to them. I knew when he told them that he knew what really happened because heard Aaron yelling about it. I kept parking in front of their house because in early fall, a ratty-looking Chevy S10 appeared in front of my house. It never moved and just kept getting tickets for being parked on the wrong side of the street. It also had expired tags. The video camera showed some guy drive up, get out, and walk away down the street. After a couple of weeks, I called to report an abandoned vehicle with expired tags. The cops show up, look over the car, and run the plate. They do some cop stuff, and after a while, a tow truck pulls up, and Aaron bolts out of the house and starts yapping at the cop, who waves off the tow truck and lets Aaron move the truck in his own driveway. That had bought that truck from his sister and parked it there just to annoy me. There were other incidents like the time I put out a winter decoration, this plastic light-up 3-foot-tall penguin in December that my son adored. The first week in January, I get an anonymous letter addressed to Mr. Penguin letting him know it was time to go back home. Other neighbors received similar letters. I'm now 100% certain that Aaron and Aaron were responsible, just 99% certain because everyone else minds their own business. That year, I decorated that penguin for Easter before putting it away. Eventually, Aaron and Aaron moved away, and some reasonable human beings moved in. Story 28, edit Hay Race. A link to the video of the smoke from the day. He left a fire burning on the ground beside a propane tank with no one home. This is a long and ongoing story. There will be a TLDR at the bottom. So my parents have lived in the same house for 30 years. They live out in the country and only have one house located reasonably close to be considered a neighbor. Over 30 years, 5 people have owned the house, some good and some bad. However, their most recent neighbors have to be the worst. I still live at home, so this is a first-hand account. It started one day when my mother called me at work to let me know that there was smoke pouring into our backyard from next door. At the time, I thought she was exaggerating, maybe a little bit, but when I got home, I knew immediately she wasn't. The smoke was so thick and strong that you could smell and see it from down the road. So I immediately decided that we should go over and let them know what's going on as if they didn't know. But when we knocked on the door, no one answered, and there were no cars in the driveway. So we decided to look along the back of the house to see what's burning, and we see that he has left grass and yard waste to burn on the ground, beside the cedar hedge that divides our properties, which is right next to their propane tank. We immediately started to panic. Because of that, fire spreads, the propane tank could combust, and there goes our house. So we decided to phone the town and tell them about the fire and to send fire services to put it out. Crisis averted. My parents went over later to discuss with him what had happened. He seemed genuinely sorry and apologized, explaining he wasn't aware of the bylaws regarding fires as of yet. He gave us his phone number to call in case we ever needed to reach him should he not be home. Then, about a week later, my mother is sitting out in our backyard with our dogs when she hears about 3 gunshots from pretty close by. She immediately panics because 1, we live in Canada, and 2, our properties are zoned residential, meaning you can't use firearms on the property. So my mom phones the neighbors to ask what's going on. She tells them she heard gunshots, and they respond, "You're not allowed to shoot guns." So at the time, my mother wasn't sure if they were allowed to and decided to phone the town to find out. They told her they weren't, but the town took it one step further and sent an officer out to talk to them about gun use. After the officer was finished talking to the neighbors, he walks over to our house to inform us that they denied owning or shooting any guns. But what's worse is that now they think my parents called the cops on them. But that's not the end of it. The last straw was when my dad was out cutting the lawn and smoke starts billowing into our yard again. It's understandable difficult to cut the grass with smoke in your eyes. So he stops and comes inside to tell my mom. They decide to just go over and talk to him, But when they get over to their driveway, they notice he has a do not enter sign at the end of his driveway. They ignore it and walk up the driveway. Then our neighbor comes out from his yard and starts yelling that they're trespassing. Arguing ensues, and when my parents get home, they tell me that he is planning to do whatever he wants because it's his property. So fast forward to now, we can no longer go outside to do any yard work without a fire being started. He goes out of his way to find leaves, grass, and anything he can just to burn it. He also decided to hang the skin of an animal deer or coyote he killed and skinned in a tree near the front of his yard near our house. He also likes to host loud parties that go into the early hours of the morning frequently. And most recently, he took up bow hunting and likes to practice on a bullseye that faces towards our house. My parents are now terrified to do anything about it because they are fearful of retaliation. It's been causing my parents a lot of info stress and anxiety, and they feel their only option is to move. TLDR, my parents' new neighbor likes to burn things so that smoke engulfs their house, likes to hang animal skins at the front of his house to attract scavengers, shoots guns and arrows in his backyard when it is illegal to do so, and is just being plain intimidating towards my parents. My parents are too scared to do anything for fear of retaliation and feel their only option is to move out of the house they've lived in for 30 years.